What is so significant about the women in Jesus' genealogy? Matthew begins with 42 names, most of them men, but there's 5 women. So let's look at the story of Rahab, way back in the book of Joshua as they enter the promised land. And what does she have to say about what it means to have faith, to cling to God, and why is she part of the genealogy that leads us to the kings and to Jesus himself? Joshua 2, 1 through 14. Joshua, Nun's son, secretly sent 2 men as spies from Shittim. He said, "Go, look over the land, especially Jericho." They set out and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab. They bedded down there. Someone told the king of Jericho, "Men from Israel have come here tonight to spy on the land." So the king of Jericho sent word to Rahab, "Send out the men who came to you, the ones who came to your house, because they have come to spy on the entire land." But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. Then she said, "Of course the men came to me, but I didn't know where they came from. The men left when it was time to close the gate at dark, but I don't know where the men went. Hurry, chase after them. You might catch up to them." But she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them under the flax stalks that she had laid out on the roof. The men from Jericho chased after them in the direction of Jordan up to the fords. As soon as those chasing them went out, the gate was shut behind them. Before the spies bedded down, Rahab went up to them on the roof. She said to the men, "I know that the Lord has given you the land. Terror over you has overwhelmed us. The entire population of the land has melted down in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Reed Sea in front of you when you left Egypt. We've also heard what you did to Sihon and Og, the 2 kings of the Amorites on the other side of the Jordan. You utterly wiped them out. We heard this, and our hearts turned to water because of you. People can no longer work up their courage. This is because the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on earth below. Now, I have been loyal to you, so pledge to me by the Lord that you in turn will deal loyally with my family. Give me a sign of good faith. Spare the lives of my father, mother, brothers, sister, along with everything they own. Rescue us from death." The men said to her, "We swear by our own lives to secure yours if you don't reveal our mission. We will deal loyally and faithfully with you when the Lord gives us the land." So we're in this question looking at the Matthew genealogy of why these 5 women are there in a genealogy normally listing just fathers and sons, and Rahab, the second one. So what's so important about Rahab to make it into the line of, well, first King David, but then Jesus himself? The thing that most people know Rahab for is that she's labeled as a prostitute. There's at least one scholarly article I read that questions whether or not the word zona here means prostitute. It might actually just mean innkeeper, but either way, that's often what she's known as, is Rahab the prostitute. And it's factual, it's there in the text, and yet one thing that I would point out, it seems to distract us from the profundity of her story. Because Rahab shows a bunch of other elements too. So one, just like Tamar last week, but Rahab is also a Gentile. She's in Jericho, part of the Canaanite land that God has now given over to Israel. And she's the first story of them entering Israel, Israel entering the promised land is not of them killing everyone that lives there, but of them actually saving someone before going to battle. And I find that fascinating. Something which kind of upsets the normal narrative that people do question what was God doing in sending Israel to Canaan, and why would he wipe everybody out without even a second chance? And we see the very first story is someone getting a chance to actually bind herself to Israel's story, and God, of course, agrees. And so there's this prostitute, but she's showing this certain element of faith. Okay, so she comes, she rescues the men, she hides them from the king of Jericho, and then she gives this incredible speech. And actually, I compare this speech with all the rest of the interactions throughout the story in the book of Joshua, at least. Let's just start with there. This woman, who's again labeled a prostitute, shows greater faith and wisdom than I think any man in the whole story of Joshua, which I find really fascinating. So Rahab says, "I know that the Lord has given you this land. Terror has overwhelmed us. The entire population has melted in fear because of you." There's this key word in the book of Joshua. I think it's actually a key word to understand what God is doing throughout the book of Joshua. It's this word, heard. We heard what God has done. We heard what God has done by splitting the Reed Sea, what he did with Egypt, what he did with the kings that opposed you. We heard. And the reason why I point this out is because later there's a direct opposite of that. Is there's other kings in the promised land in the book of Joshua who hear what God has done or what God is doing through Israel. And their reaction is to mount up their battlements and to go to war. So there's a direct contrast between the kings who do battle with Joshua and who ultimately get annihilated. They hear what God is doing and they decide we need to attack. Rahab hears, same word, and her reaction is, I want to be a part of what the Lord is doing. And so she hears and she actually responds with this incredible faith. And so we heard all this, and here's my reaction. The Lord your God is God in heaven above and earth below. That's one of the greatest statements of faith and of understanding God's identity in really the whole Bible, right? It almost doesn't get better than that. And it's coming from a Gentile prostitute named Rahab. Now I have been loyal to you, so pledge me by the Lord that you will deal loyally with me. Let me be a part of Israel's story. I've secured your life, now secure mine. And it's that faith right there. That's what I would point to say, why is Rahab so important? Well, it's because it highlights something about who God is. He shows mercy to those who reach out to him. He shows mercy to those in disrepute. He shows mercy to the Gentiles, and Rahab shows again this tenacity to cling to God's covenant, to say, I want to be a part of God's story. I want to be a part of what he is doing. Will you let me in? And so they let her in. And she doesn't just dissolve into obscurity. She gets grafted into the line of kings. And so we'll see that later, but we saw that in Matthew's genealogy. She becomes one of the great-great-grandmothers of the King David and of Jesus himself. And I think it's this element of this loyalty to God's covenant, this tenacity and faith to say, God is the God of all of the earth, of the heaven above and the earth below, and I want to be a part of his story. And she becomes a model of faith for all of us to emulate, more so than most of the men, certainly most of the men of Israel. She shows this tenacity to cling to God no matter what.